Welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. My name is Yuri. I help people and brands shine through communities and personal connections. And my guest is Joshua Zerkel, a second-time guest. Yeah, we need to talk more about this. A community-integrated go-to-market professional with 20 plus years of practical experience and the author of the Community Code. I can tell you from my personal experience, one of the most comprehensive and very, very practical, interesting books I've read so far on growing a business with the help of community. So, Josh, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Yuri. I'm really happy to be back. I've loved our conversations and I'm looking forward to this one too.
Me too. Me too. I can't wait to dive deeper. Once again, for those people who haven't read your book, The Community Code, please go and check it out. You must read it. You must read it and then take this torch, go to your leadership and show them why and how exactly your community can help your business. So, what is one lesson that you've learned about community while writing a book?
I think for me, one thing that really came out is how many of the problems that community builders continually run into over and over again are related to where they sit in their organization. And when I look at the structural patterns that I've seen, the systemic issues, it's because most community builders are sitting in the wrong spot. And there are a lot of reasons why community sits on the different teams that they do. But when we think about the problems that we look at, all of the education for community builders that we see over and over again, most of it is around how do I communicate value? How do I prove ROI? How do I show the business that community matters? How do I make sure I still have a job when I can't really talk about what the impact of my work is? It's not because we community builders are not doing the work. The work is getting done. And it may even be that the members who are part of our programs are getting a lot of value and we may be creating value for the business. But from what I've seen and from what I've experienced, so much of it is really limited by how our organizations are currently structured.
Yeah, and there is a quote from your book that its placement, community placement in the organization, will directly impact how well others understand value and support your work. And that's the topic that we will talk about, where exactly community sits in the organizational structure. And I clearly know that you are passionate about it, but I don't know why. So why do you care about it?
I care about it, one, because I care about our peers in the community world. And I hate seeing people who are so hardworking struggle because of a structural issue that they can't control and they can't fix or change. And I also care about it because I've seen it go so horribly wrong so many times in my career because of the exact reasons that you mentioned. Like people don't see the value because it's in the wrong spot, or they expect it to do a certain thing when it structurally can't because of where it's situated in an organization, or frankly, the things that it's able to achieve are limited because of the team that it sits on. And to me, that's just a major bummer. And I really want to see that changed for all of those reasons. And, in conversations I've had with other community builders and other business leaders, sometimes it's funny how defeated people are around this. They're just like, well, it's the way it's always been. So that's probably what we should do. Okay, all of this is made up. We made up how our organizations are structured. We made up the names of our teams. We've made up that community as a function needs to sit in a certain spot. If we made it up, that means we can remake it. And I want us who are doing this work and the leaders who are helping make sure that this work happens to really reconsider that the old way of doing things is the way that we should always continue, because I don't think it's true.
Old ways are old ways, and you definitely have to rethink sometimes. And when they do some marketing advertisement, they usually start with something people have to be afraid of, with some kind of fear that if you won't buy this product, this is what happens. So before we dive deeper in the right way where community have to sit in the organization, let's start with this a little bit of a fear. So what is the biggest risk when community sits in the wrong department?
I think there's a few risks. One is a risk to what it can achieve. So if it sits in the wrong department, let's say community sits within marketing, it'll usually be aligned towards marketing specific goals because that's where it ladders up. That's where they're getting their resources from. That's who's paying the bills. And so the marketing team will always take first precedent over this is what community is here to do. These are the goals that it's driving, and here are the resources it gets to do those goals. Hey, if CS or if sales or if product wants to get some benefit from community, that's nice. That's a nice to have. And what ends up happening is because marketing is paying the bills for community, all of the work gets funneled in that direction, even though the people who are working on the community team know it can have positive impact in all of these other places. And even though those people in those other teams are asking for community to make an impact, they often can't because there's no resources or time to do it. And so one of the biggest risks is an opportunity risk. We're missing a big opportunity to make a bigger impact via community. Another risk is perception. So when teams don't see or feel community making an impact for their own work, and I'm talking about the stakeholders that might be outside of the team that community sits on, then community starts looking at it as a nice to have. When you go and you present community work to the broader company, if three-quarters of the company has no interaction with community inside of their own work and impacting their own work, honestly, what do they care? You show pictures of an event where there's smiling people. Maybe you show a couple of quotes from things that posted online by members. That's nice. No one's going to say that that's a bad thing. But do they really care? No, they don't really care. And so because they don't care, there's a reduction in the perceived value of community. And the third is, I would say, a career risk for people who are leading community programs, because you're limited as to what the programs that you're leading can achieve, and you're limited to as their perceived value. The view of you as a professional within the organization, your impact and thereby your value gets diminished. And so there's, I think, a prevailing notion that community is always one of the first teams to get cut whenever there's any reduction in force or a layoff or any sort of budget reduction. Community is one of the first places because the perceived value of it is quite low. And so there's all these risks associated with making sure that community is seen as something important. And all of that stems to where it sits within an organization and what it's trying to achieve and the resources it has to achieve it.
It also breaks my heart when I see that some companies are cutting their community initiatives, and I'm like, how can you do this? It doesn't mean that community is not bringing you anything. It just means that you are making it in the wrong ways, that you are putting in the wrong direction, or something is not right done. Because when it's right done, some of the companies are community led. They grow. You definitely know that they are growing with the help of community, and they're like getting amazing results. So let's focus on the bright side of the
Yes.
community, and let's start with where community can usually sit. Like, name all the teams that community can be placed in.
So typically, I've seen this over the course of my career in a few different examples. One is within marketing, another is within success, less frequently within sales or within product. Usually it sits within one of those four teams. Very, very seldom does it sit on its own as a standalone go-to-market initiative. And so within each of those teams, you have pros and cons. If you sit within marketing, the nice thing is that you typically have access to marketing channels. So you have access to email, to social, to events, to broad messaging and campaigns that you can easily latch community onto. But then you're limited because of all the ways that marketing is limited. It's difficult to measure marketing initiatives. It's difficult to prove value. Although there are plenty of people within marketing who are very happy to take credit for literally anything that happens. The reality is marketing is a joint effort. There's brand efforts, there's campaign efforts, there's field marketing, there's community, there's all these things. And they all ladder up towards typically delivering leads or pipeline or influence or awareness or something along those lines. So there's definite pros there. You have access to all of the resources. The downsides are that marketing, it's not at the level of depth that typically relationships are built. And the way I usually define community is it's relationships at scale. And so whereas a lot of marketing is very transactional, if you work with marketers, and I've been in marketing most of my career, it's very, I do this, they do that. So I have an email campaign, I send it out, they either read it or they click, and that's it. My work here is done. But if you do the same thing in community, you send out the email, you get them to go visit the community platform, then a conversation starts and a relationship begins to form. So the when you sit community within marketing, most marketers won't understand that perpetual motion that gets created and needs to be cultivated within community. So you're always at this disadvantage of explaining the work that you do in most of marketing is quick. The work that quick and shallow. The work that we do within community is slow and at depth. And so these are very difficult things for most marketing leaders to hold because especially in the world of tech, we don't work on long timelines. It's just not something that's natural for us. But community is the place where longer timelines happen. And so there's often a fundamental mismatch there. In CS or CX, depending on the nature of your organization, if community sits there, it's usually tied to a completely different set of programs, activities, and metrics. Usually it's tied to adoption, retention, and sometimes account growth. All of those things are fine. However, you are able to build the depth because this is where relationships typically happen, but you don't have access to all of the channels that you need, like you would have in marketing, to put community out into the world in a way that's effective and broad. You're often tied to, frankly, less sexy metrics and programs where you might be adjacent to the support team. And not that the work of support isn't important, it's very important, but that's another place where it's seen as relatively low value within most organizations. So you're often adjacent to these more helper functions within a company, which are typically seen as not having a lot of value to the organization. And so you're already in that danger zone of, I need to prove my value, I need to prove my value. And it's laddering up into this team where I typically don't have the resources I'll need to do the work effectively. Then if you're in sales, it looks totally different. This is usually more for, well, there's only one way to put it, creating direct revenue, typically via community sourced or community qualified leads. It's actually a nice program in the sense that you're able to clearly see, we did this in the community, we generated a lead, yes or no. What it's typically not very focused on are long-term relationships. And so while you can do lots of things in the world of community, and I certainly have in my teams in the past, to generate pipeline, generate revenue, both direct and indirect via community, sitting it within sales does the sales thing. It's looking for transactions. And you're typically tied to a revenue number, which is, if you work within sales, that's kind of the name of the game. For most community builders, I don't know that that's a thing that they really want or that they're equipped to manage, handle, and build their programs towards. So it really puts a different lens on things. And then finally, if you're within product, you're closest to the thing that most of your customers will probably care about the most, which is the product itself. So you have a lot of insight and information and maybe even influence on what's happening with the product, what community is saying about it, how it can get fed back into product. But then you're left at this place where you don't really have access to the channels you need to market the community. You don't have goals in and of themselves for specific metric-based outcomes like adoption, retention, growth, awareness, advocacy. So you're in this weird middle zone of trying to do a bunch of different things to get people to use the product or get feedback from them about the product. But it's difficult from that perspective to often see how you're driving the business forward and creating value other than this is information for the product team that's useful, which is important. Each one of these things that these teams drives is important. But when you sit community within each one of them, you end up being boxed in as to what you're really there to do because you're limited by the confines of your organization. So the challenge with this structure is each of these are vertical. Each organization does a vertical thing, leads everyone who works in that organization is tied in some way or should be to the metrics that the leader of that organization has set. But community doesn't work that way. It's horizontal. The way it works is it follows the customer's journey, and the customer's journey spans each one of those vertical pillars. And so I think smart organizations in the future, maybe even some that are starting now, are starting to think about how do we connect the dots via community across these different touch points rather than sitting community in one spot, hoping it somehow does the rest of these things. I think sitting community outside of that structure is the better way for the future, because otherwise we're going to be perpetually stuck in this place where we're constantly trying to juggle all of these asks and requests from across the organization and not doing a great job with probably 3 out of those 4. We're focused on the one that's paying our bills. And when we do that, we're limiting what community can be and do, and we're also not showing the value of what can actually achieve for the business.
It sounds like community has to be a standalone team at some point so that it can easily work with all the other teams. And sales, it's been with us forever. Marketing, a little older, not that old, but a little older. Like customer experience, customer success is like more like newer, sexy thing. And community is
Mhm.
like the next sexy thing. And
I
what
think it is.
has what has to happen? What has to really happen within businesses, within corporates, within organizations, so that community can have its own seat on the table?
I think it's a set of things that need to happen both within businesses and frankly with us, with the builders. Like I think abdicating our responsibility to wait for some leader is going to get this, and then they're going to structure this differently. Let's have some agency here. I think we can help drive this. I think we as an industry, as professionals doing this work, need to stop saying community can be and do everything and start really defining what are the boundaries of this work and what are we really best suited to do? And why is community uniquely suited to do this across the entirety of the customer journey? I think we need to work on our own narrative as an industry because when we do that, we make it easier for leaders to say, I want that. I want that journey, that horizontal connecting of the dots, that integration across all of go-to-market that community is uniquely positioned to provide. So I think there's some work that we need to do to sell our own story, to first figure out what our story is, because if you ask 10 different community builders, they're going to tell you 10 different things. And we need to figure out the story so that we can tell it to potential leaders who are in positions to make this happen. I think from the leader side, I think smarter leaders, more modern leaders are understanding what they understood maybe 10 or 15 years ago with customer success when that was a new function. At the time, it's hard to imagine it now because every organization of size has it. But at the time, it was this new thing that was being wedged in between sales and support that nobody understood why we would have this because we already have those two functions. And before too long, people started having it more and more at companies, and now it's a real function. And it's an important function that every company of size has. We're kind of there where CS was maybe 15 years ago, with the exception that community has also kind of been around this whole time. So we're in this weird spot where I think we need to take agency in retelling our story in a new way. And leaders who understand and have seen community play a role across a customer's journey are in a really good spot, especially if they are like the head of business or COO, to say community can touch all of these different functions. We're going to place it as its own team, as a standalone function that sits right alongside each one of these parallel paths. And as the leader of business, it's going to be the COO's job to help define, okay, in a given fiscal year or quarter, here's where we need community to make the biggest impact. Here's where we needed to make less impact. So they're helping balance the work and the mandates. I think we forget that under the world of go-to-market, there's many independent teams that typically sit under a head of business or COO, not just marketing, sales, CX. There's usually business strategy. There's ops. Like the community should be one of these that spans the entirety of the motion because that's where it can have the biggest impact. So to change how the current situation is, I think we need both of those things to happen. We need to really refine and tell our story as community builders better. We need to better explain why and how community works as this integrative function. And we need to work with leaders who really get that if we connect community in this way, not as an afterthought, not as an adjunct, not as a side thing that happens, not as a nice to have, but as a core function of go-to-market, we can create really different value for the business and for our customers.
I remember at our first episode, Community ROI with you, I asked you the question about do you have a business education? And you told me that you got one. And it feels like community builders has to have one because
Yeah.
you need to, first of all, you don't have to wait for someone to tell you what to do with the community, but you have to identify what is the best way, like having all your knowledge, what is the best ways that your customers, that your clients, that your community members can help to move your business forward. And then how to translate these KPIs, these metrics that you have of your business, how to translate them back into community, and how to make it like a win-win situation. And it's very hard way to do it, and not everyone can actually do it, because at some point it's good community, as you said, can be good to have, because, oh yeah, we will have nice conversations, we are connected with our brands, and then it's not totally another conversation to drive business value out of those good to have stuff that is connected with the community. So I'm curious, so okay, so let's have four teams. So marketing, then customer success or customer experience, or together, as however you name this, and sales and product. So what is one program that people can run for, like under each of those teams? What is one community program that people can run, and what metrics to track and why?
Yeah, so let's start at the beginning of the journey with marketing. So this is where most community teams sit now. The interesting thing, and before I go into the details, is I actually don't think programs that we run need to be any different. It's how they connect across these different verticals that would be the difference. So it's about really integrating community into them. So for instance, in marketing runs campaigns all the time. There are brand campaigns, there's launches, literally you name it, that happens under the banner of marketing. Typically, how things go will be launch happens, let's say a new brand campaign, it'll launch, and then the brand team will say, oh, community, can you amplify this in the community? Can you take these assets and put them into the community? That's fine. But what would be much better is if, as that campaign is being created, community is brought in, and as the campaign is being discussed, they say, community, what role can you help play in this launch, in this campaign? Can we source member quotes? Can we run an event for members specifically around this campaign? Can we tie some of the goals that we have this campaign back into what you're doing in community? So it's really about taking the thing that's already happening and plugging community into it, not being a helpful thing that happens after. Usually communities in the, oh, we can help with that. Wrong way to look at it. Because as soon as you frame your work as being helpful, it's not necessary. And we need to make our work necessary. So in marketing, it's actually very easy to connect a lot of those dots, because you can easily bring in via community. If there's a marketing message, you can bring in the human element of it via community. You can connect those dots to make the overall campaign richer. In sales, it looks a little bit different. So sometimes you're working in tandem with, let's say, a field marketing team. So let's say field marketing is doing a series of events that are more thought leadership based. You partner with them and do a series of events that are more community centric, where the field marketing events might be more for thought leadership. Maybe they're bringing in the VPs and C-suite from a company to speak on a panel. You pair that with a community meetup for all the people who work on those teams at a given company. Rather than focusing on the C-suite, you focus on the people who are doing the work. And this way you're creating in tandem with field marketing or with sales events something that is for everybody. They have an audience, community has an audience, you work together, and then you look at the pipeline that's generated from those events, both from expansion all the way through to net new. And so you can very easily track those together via campaigns. So that's one way that I would look at it. When it comes to product, it's actually really easy with product, because they're always looking for feedback. They're looking for feedback on what's working and what isn't, and they're looking for help with launches. And so when you have a community event, let's say in the example I just gave, where you work with sales for a sales focused event, you do a community event also. In between, you can also help with a focus group. You can host one for community members specifically who might be attending the community focused event, and you can work with product to co-host an event with them, maybe during a break. I did this quite a bit when I was at Asana, where we would go in and do a series of workshops, and then at lunch we would work with product to sponsor a focus group where they would provide the lunch, we would facilitate the space. Together we combined forces. They could not have done that without us, and we could not have done that without them. And so that's the level that I want folks to start thinking about, is not how do we come in and help after? That's nice. In business, we're not so interested in just being nice. We want to be effective. And so where can we connect the dots in a way that's more than nice and helpful, but in a way that's truly impactful for their work? So for each one of these teams, there's ways to build all of this in, even in something like success, where they are typically focused on relationships. We can focus on different relationships than a CS person might, for instance. So typically in CS, if you're working in, let's say, just B2B SaaS, typically the CSM is focused on the relationship with the team lead or the person who's responsible for rolling something out, like the person.
Hmm.
On the community side, we can be responsible for the team that's under that person. So whereas the CSM has limited time, they can't work with that one point of contact all the time. Community isn't always on available place for them to get their questions answered, to connect with peers and so on. And within the community, you can provide programs for the broader team, not just that one individual. So again, you're helping connect the dots, helping CS understand this is where a community fits into the picture, but you're co-leading programs with them. So I think what ends up happening a lot in the world of community is we see something happening in a different team. We think to ourselves, because I found most people in the community world are helpers. We want to help. We want to make things better. We want to support others. We go to a team and say, we can help you with this. We can do this for you, rather than let's figure out something we can do together. I see this gap. Here are some ideas for how we might be able to intersect community with this work. Let's work together to figure out how to join our programs, integrate them together to create a better result. It's a totally different lens to look at it through.
But community is usually an add-on thing to existing processes. So when you're coming to a sales team, they already have their pipeline that worked for years and they've done it that way forever. And when you come into product, they already have their a little bit of feedback pipeline or whatever they call it, marketing, the same stuff. So how to co-create this experience, how not to be just helpful, but how to actually come into existing processes and tell to people, hey, here is how we can co-create, how to make them listen to the community team.
I would do a couple things. One is I would go to the COO or head of business. If you are a community leader, regardless of what team you sit on, maybe you need to clear this with your boss first, but say, I'm delivering what I need to do for our team because I sit within this vertical. I'd like to understand what other parts of the business I might be able to intersect community work with. I'd like to have a conversation with the head of business or COO or head of strategy, whoever that may be. So you get some tops down information. And let's say that there's a challenge, even though sales has been around forever, maybe they're having challenges with certain points in the pipeline. Maybe inserting community into certain points could offer validation for part of their sales conversations, just as an example. And so you identify with the help of people on the sales team, like for all the things that are working, there's usually some pieces that aren't. Where could community, if we connect the dots well, help make an impactful, positive impact? Where can we connect the dots in a way that we're telling the story better for our customers and our prospects? Where can we show more examples or connect a prospect to someone in the community who's already doing what they want to use the product for? So you go in and find where there's already pressure in a specific workflow. The workflows are already established. You're exactly right. Like these teams have been around. So you're not asking them to reinvent the wheel. And importantly, you're not asking, where can we help? You're asking how you can help make a workflow better. And so that's a big difference. It may seem like it's splitting hairs, but getting us out of this, we're helpers. Helping is great. I don't want people to not be helpful, but it constantly puts us in this add-on category rather than not adding on, we're creating value. And we need to find the spots in the organization where they are looking to create value rather than we just did this thing over here. Look at us. Like this is good for everybody. No one's going to argue with you there, but you're also not making the biggest impact that you could. And so you end up not, if you follow this model, you don't create net new programs. Typically, you're just connecting the dots between programs that you would already be running and the organizations within your company that need them the most.
It reminded me of the movie Venom, where it connected with Eddie's body and it's kind of
Mhm.
like became one symbiotic thing that is superpowered, like human superpowered with Venom. And I feel
Yeah.
like sometimes it happens that way when community works with other teams. So I don't really know who's Venom and who's human, but the idea is that they are working together and they're getting
Better
some shit
together.
done. Yeah, exactly.
Better together. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, this isn't done a lot right now. I think it could be and it should be. And I encourage our peers to try and just try approaching things with this different lens because things can be better together. Ironically, all the years I've been in companies, B2C, B2B, I've often been surprised at how, even though we're all supposed to be one family within a company, teams don't work together that much. And community is one of the few spots where we actually see the entirety of the customer journey. And we have real value that we can help teams create by the nature of us being in this unique position. And when you go into conversations with peers across teams, you can tell the better together story because we do have things that we can uniquely offer to help each of these teams get multiples out of their work. Not us helping them, not us supporting them. It's us connecting their work with ours to make everything better.
It's also like community professionals have to talk more about how it works for them with their organizations. And, like recently, my two favorite books of the year, or maybe like of the decade, I don't know, about communities, of course, the Community Code by George Zerkel. And also there is another one, The Community First Advantage by Chris Catania. And I totally believe that if people read these two books, they will get everything they need. If leaders are reading to those books, amazing. You will definitely understand how to make it better. If community builders, you will know how to share your story. And also to a point, you told me about this tandem of sales with field marketing. And usually, no matter where community actually sits, it works with more teams. So if it sits in marketing, it can work with sales. If it sits with product, it can work with customer success. So from your experience, what are the best tandems that you've seen based on where community sits?
That's a good question. I think there's three. So if we start in marketing, I think community plus, usually it's life cycle. Life cycle is designed to help people learn how onboard and stay connected with a product. Those are all very germane to the world of how community works and what it can do. So connecting the dots between those two programs, I think, can make a big difference for how people experience your product, whatever your product might be, because it humanizes what are typically just marketing messages and it makes it feel much more tangible and much more real. In success or CX, because we have this ability to gather a lot of information in community about how people are using a product and their workarounds, their tips and tricks, their examples, those can be directly inserted into the work of CX and offer a real grounding to what is typically a more, we have a way we talk about our product, we have a way we train people to do it, and all of that's important. And here's how people are really doing it in the real world. And so you pair those together for something that's really impactful. In sales, I think that the best example is what I shared earlier, which is if there's a sales motion that's happening that's targeting a specific altitude within an organization, like VP or leader or whatever, pair that with something for community that targets everyone else that's there. Because it's very rare, even in a B2B enterprise sales motion, that the decision maker is the only person that has an opinion about something before they buy it. Usually they say, hey, team lead, what are your folks actually using? Or what do they think about this? Community's job can influence all of that. And so that's where pairing those two together becomes really powerful. And so if I had to start with each team, that's one of the places that I would look to do that sort of joint work together.
How should community evolve as company evolves? Because I totally believe that community in a startup is different than community in a scaled up enterprise. Or so what is your take on like growing the community team or overall community impact from startup to evolving, growing organization?
Yeah, the impact to the organization, I think it should evolve as an organization evolves. So what you're trying to do with community when it's a tiny startup is typically very different than when it's a huge enterprise. And when it's a tiny startup, the oxygen for a startup is getting new signups, getting new customers. So your work might be really focused on partnering with marketing for advocacy and awareness, and maybe with customer success on getting people to use the product and stay with it, less so on turning it into revenue. Whereas as things grow and change and your brand becomes more well established and you don't need to worry about the awareness and the advocacy as much, maybe your work focuses more on adoption, retention, and growth, like growth within accounts or growth to other teams. And so how community evolves over time should keep pace with what the business's goals are at any given moment. I've seen this go pretty wrong where a community program started one way and it just kind of stays that way the whole time. And you know, if we're doing our jobs, I mean, if we're being honest, like we are in businesses, unless you're working for a nonprofit or a community-based organization, that's totally different. If we're speaking about we're working and building community for a company, you'll often hear me say you're doing one of two things. You're either making the company money or you're saving the company money. And at different points in a company's life, one of those things becomes more important than the other, depending on where you're at, where your company's at. And so making sure that you are aligned to whatever your company is trying to do is frankly how you should be thinking. And that's how you continue to show relevant impact over time is I understand what the company needs right now. Our program is designed to help support, not support, but integrate with all of the things that are happening across the company to do that. When it comes to the team itself, I think things are changing a lot in the world of community. I've been lucky in the past. I've had very small teams and I've also had very, very large teams. And part of it was the nature of, if I was on a smaller team, it's because we weren't trying to cover as many geographic areas and as many languages. If it was bigger, I needed to cover more ground and I needed more people to do that. There's things that are happening now with the tools that are available and how AI can help with a lot of the mechanical behind the scenes of running of the programs and even some of the translation of content into different languages that simply weren't available even a year ago. And so when it comes to building out the teams, I think there are people who are good at really different parts of the community experience. There are people who are really good at managing and running forums and other online forms of communication. There are people who are really good at events, and events are a completely different skill set than running a forum. And then there's people who are more general or really good at membership programs. I think as I build out programs, I typically look for people who can really dive deep into each one of those because each one is really its own area of specialty. And I'm heartened when I see community teams have members that are focused on these specific things because I think for a long time in the world of community, we've really anchored on generalists. You got to be good at everything. And I think each person on a team does have to have knowledge of everything, but that's like asking everyone who works in marketing to be good at every part of marketing. And if we want to grow up as a discipline within the world of business, we need to be able to define what these disciplines are. And we just don't do that consistently right now. It does happen sometimes, but not all the time.
And I also believe that one of the bigger challenges are that, for example, if we're talking about an event, it can be very easy to fight with different teams. Kind of like marketing says it's event for them, sales says it's event for them, community sales it's for them. When all together it's for business, it's not for any of you. It's for business. It's like for growing business, for getting new customers, for talking to existing customers. And I feel like that's exactly what also community is helping to make. It helping to connect the dots and like telling, hey, we are all in this together. And if we are dealing with this together, we'll be better on than fighting for like who is who and what is what. And I really wish to have the sky is the limit, but time is the limit. So I'm curious if you could design the perfect org structure from community from scratch, what would it look like?
I would have it be in the go-to-market organization, there would be marketing, sales, success. Product usually sits in the product org, but it's very closely tied. There's usually go-to-market strategy, and sometimes there's ops. Community would be one of those pillars. It would sit alongside the rest of the rest. It might look a little bit different. It might be smaller, but its job would be to work across all of the different go-to-market functions. That's the org that I would design.
And I also believe that you've done a very great job of getting even more information in the community code book. So everyone, please go read it. You must read it. Sorry, not sorry, but I just love this book, so you have to love it too.
Please read it.
Otherwise, why the hell are you listening to this podcast? So go read this book. And name 2 people, of course, from your book that I should reach out to talk about community ROI.
Yeah, there's 2 people that I could think of. One is Jane Nataraja, who was at Patreon and Grammarly. She's amazing. The second is Tiffany Oda, who was at Salesforce and Talkbase and is actually running the program at Asana now. She's incredible and really amazing at community ops and community ROI.
And last but not least, what is one question about where community sits in the organizations that I should have asked you but didn't?
We didn't address this exactly, but why is it where it is now? I think is the question. Like, why does it sit where it sits now? And I think it's mostly just inertia. It's inertia from where a community has always sat. Typically, it's sat within support or support adjacent, or because people didn't know what else to do with it, it would sometimes sit within marketing. And inertia is not a great place to run a business from. And I really challenge any business leader or even a community builder to really look at this from a different perspective and say, okay, this is how it was always done. Is it the way that we should be doing this moving forward? And I'm guessing in most cases, the answer will be no.
And it's the hardest
Try
answer
something
to
different.
get. It's the hardest part, especially as a community builder. It's very hard to understand that something is working not the way it should work. And then you have to kind of like deal with all this machine, like maybe well oiled, maybe not that well oiled, but it's still a machine. And you have to put your finger inside and say, hey, this is how we've done. It doesn't mean we have to continue doing this way. Maybe we should try that one. And I feel like that's the hard work that community builders have to do. Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, we already do a lot of hard work, but imagine if we did this particular piece of the work of reorienting where we sit, the rest of our work would be made more impactful. And so none of this is to say, and please, community builders, don't come for me, because I believe that all of us are doing good work and we are making an impact. And with some changes, I think we could make even more without us having to fight the uphill battle that we constantly have to fight all.
Yeah. And Josh, thank you so much for this deeper dive into nitty gritty of the community, where it sits within an organization, what we have to do and what we're already doing, how to make it better. Thank you so much for writing such a practical and really, once again, I keep praise it, but it's an amazing book. So I can't help but tell the good words because that's how it is. So people go read it, read the community code. And thank you so much for doing what you're doing, for keep investing in this community industry growth and for keep creating all the stuff that you are creating and making the industry, moving the industry forward. So thank you very much for that.
Yuri, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And yeah, see you in the community world. And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.